Hey guys! In today's video, we tell the unbelievable story of Vivian Thorne's near-death experience, which includes a surprising encounter with none other than Queen Elizabeth in hell. Prepare yourself for a journey full of mysteries and spiritual revelations. Before we start, let us know in the comments which city you're watching, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any impressive stories like this. Hello, my name is Vivian Thorne. I am 52 years old and live in Monterey County, California. I have been married to Marcus for 25 years, and we have a son, Elliot, who is now 24 years old. I work as an accountant at a small local company, and I live a pretty ordinary life. Or at least it did until that night that changed everything. You know, I've never been a very spiritual or religious person. I went to church from time to time, more out of habit than conviction. He believed in God, but in a distant way without thinking much about it. My life revolved around family, work, and small everyday pleasures. I considered myself a practical person, with my feet on the ground. But all that changed 7 years ago, when I had an experience that still baffles me today. It was a near-death experience, or NDE as some call it. I know that many people may doubt it or think it was just a dream or hallucination caused by a lack of oxygen in the brain. Believe me, I also doubted it at first. But what I experienced was so real, so intense, that I can't explain it any other way. Before I get into the details of what happened that night, I need to tell you a little about what led to this situation. It all started a few years ago, when I started having health problems. At first it was small things. Tiredness, shortness of breath when climbing stairs, a persistent cough that woke me up at night. I thought it was just stress from work, or maybe age was catching up. But little by little the symptoms got worse. I visited several doctors, took dozens of tests, but no one could figure out exactly what I had. Some said it was asthma, others said it was anxiety. I came to think it was all psychological. But I knew there was something wrong, very wrong with my body. It was only after much insistence that we discovered the real cause. Mold. Our house, that charming house in the hills of Monterey, was infested with mold. The problem was hidden in the walls, in the ceiling, in places we couldn't see. But it was there, silently poisoning me day after day. When we finally found out, it was too late. My health was seriously compromised. The doctor said I had developed an extreme sensitivity to mold, something that affected my lungs and my entire respiratory system. It was a difficult period, with trips to and from the hospital, treatments that seemed to have no end. And it was in this context that everything happened. I was at my parents' house in Santa Clara County, trying to recover away from the toxic environment of our home. But that night, my body just decided it couldn't take it anymore. And that's when I began my journey to the other side, an experience that completely changed my outlook on life, death, and everything in between. It was a night like any other. I was at my parents' house, lying on the bed in the guest room, trying to find a comfortable sleeping position. I had been struggling to breathe normally for months, but that night was different. I felt like my chest was being crushed by an invisible weight. I remember looking at the digital clock on the bedside table. It was just after midnight. The room was dark, lit only by the faint light coming from the street, filtering through the thin curtains. The silence of the night was broken only by the sound of my own panting. I tried sitting up in bed, thinking that might help. But every move was a struggle. My lungs felt like they had turned to stone. The air just wouldn't come in. I started to panic. I knew something was very wrong. I wanted to scream for help. Call my parents, my husband, someone. But my voice wouldn't come out. It was like my entire body was shutting down, function by function. My vision started to blur, little black dots dancing in front of my eyes. At that moment, I heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Elliot, my son. He must have heard something, maybe my labored breathing. I saw the door open and his silhouette appeared. "Mom?" he called, his voice full of concern. I tried to respond, but I couldn't. Elliot ran to the bed, turning on the bedroom light. I remember seeing the terror in his eyes when he realized what was happening. "Mom! Mom, what's happening?" he screamed, holding my hands. Elliot has always been a smart and quick-acting boy. Within seconds, he had the phone in his hand calling 911. I heard his trembling voice explaining the situation, asking for an ambulance as soon as possible. Meanwhile, I continued to struggle to breathe. Each inspiration was a losing battle. I felt like I was drowning on dry land. My entire body ached from the effort of trying to pull air into my lungs. The next few minutes seemed like an eternity. Elliot was at my side, holding my hand, telling me to hang in there, that help was on the way. But I could feel like I was losing the battle. My consciousness began to waver, like a light bulb about to go out. I heard sirens in the distance getting closer. Elliot ran to open the front door. More footsteps in the hallway, unfamiliar voices. The paramedics entered the room, their faces serious and focused. They got to work immediately, hooking me up to machines, putting an oxygen mask on my face. But it was too late. I could feel my consciousness slipping away. The voices around me became more and more distant, as if I were sinking into deep water. The last thing I saw was Elliot's face, tears streaming down his cheeks, begging me to stay. I can't say how long I stayed in that darkness. It could have been seconds, minutes, or hours. Time seemed to have no meaning. But then I realized that something had changed. The pain was gone. The desperate struggle to breathe was over. In fact, I didn't even feel my body anymore. Slowly, I began to become aware of my surroundings. I was no longer in my parents' room. I was in a completely different place. It was a tunnel, but not an ordinary tunnel. It looked more like one of the New York subway tunnels, the ones you see in movies. The walls were gray concrete, damp and cold. A dense fog hung in the air, making it difficult to see. I looked down and was surprised to see that it had a shape, something similar to a body, but not exactly physical. It was more like an ethereal version of myself. I could move, but I couldn't feel the ground beneath my feet. It was a strange feeling, like floating and walking at the same time. The tunnel stretched out in front of me, disappearing into darkness. A faint light shone in the distance, but it was difficult to tell how far away it was. The air there was heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't define. It wasn't exactly bad, but it wasn't comfortable either. It was as if the environment itself was alive, pulsing with an invisible force. I started to walk, or rather float towards the light. As I progressed, I realized I was not alone. There were other people in the tunnel, or at least shapes that looked like people. Some walked with determination, others wandered aimlessly. I tried to get one of them's attention, but it was as if I were invisible. Nobody seemed to notice me. The feeling of displacement was overwhelming. I knew I didn't belong there. It was like being in a foreign country where you don't know the language or customs. Everything was strange, alien. And yet there was an unsettling familiarity, as if a part of me recognized the place somehow. I continued moving forward, driven by a force I couldn't understand. The light at the end of the tunnel didn't seem to get any closer, no matter how far I walked. It was frustrating and disorienting. I began to wonder if this was what people called purgatory, a place of waiting, of transition. It was then that I noticed something even stranger. Some of the shapes passing by me seemed trapped, as if they were struggling against invisible chains. They moved with difficulty, their faces contorted into expressions of anguish. I wanted to help them, but I didn't know how. And honestly, I was afraid I'd end up in prison like them if I tried to interfere. As I went further, I started to hear whispers. They were distant, incomprehensible voices, as if they were speaking in a language I didn't know. Sometimes I thought I recognized one word or another, but soon the sound was lost in the fog. Time remained meaningless there. I can't tell you how long I walked in that tunnel. It could have been minutes or years. The only thing I knew was that I needed to keep moving forward, towards that distant light. Something told me that this was where I would find the answers, or at least the next step on my journey. But a part of me also resisted, an inner voice that screamed that I shouldn't be there, that I needed to go back. Back to where? For my body? For my family? At that moment, these things seemed distant, like memories from a previous life, And yet the sense of urgency persisted. I was stuck between two worlds, not truly belonging to either of them. And it was in this state of limbo that I found the figure that would change the course of my journey. As I walked through the tunnel trying to understand where I was and what I should do, I saw a figure standing out in the fog. It was a man, or at least he appeared to be a man. He was standing a few feet away, staring at what appeared to be a pocket watch. As I got closer, I could see its details better. He was dressed as if he had stepped straight out of a 1940s film noir. He wore an impeccable gray suit with a matching fedora hat. His white hair was perfectly combed, visible under the brim of his hat. There was something about him that intrigued me and, at the same time, made me uncomfortable. When I got closer, he looked up from the clock and looked at me. His gaze was intense, almost hostile. I stood frozen, not knowing whether I should say something or just walk past him. Before I could decide, he said, "You're late," he said, his deep, rough voice echoing in the tunnel. I was confused. Late for what? I didn't even know where I was or what was happening. "I'm sorry," I replied hesitantly, "but I don't know what you're talking about. Where are we? What is this place?" The man let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You know very well where you are, my dear. Everyone knows when they get here. Some just take longer to accept it." His words left me even more confused and a little scared. "I really don't know," I insisted. "The last place I remember being was my bedroom at my parents' house. I couldn't breathe and then I was here." The man looked at me with an expression that mixed irritation and something that looked like pity. "Ah, a newbie," he murmured, more to himself than to me. Then, tucking his watch into his waistcoat pocket, he turned to me completely. "Very well, Miss Thorne, since I must explain the obvious. You are dead, or nearly so. This is what you living people call limbo, a place between worlds, if you will. And I am, shall we say, a guide." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. Dead? I couldn't be dead. I had a family, a life to return to. "No," I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "There must be some mistake. I need to go back. My son, my husband." The man raised a hand, interrupting me. "There's no mistake, Miss Thorne. You're here because your time in the living world is over. Or it should be. But you're resisting and it's causing complications." I looked around at the other shapes wandering the tunnel. "What about these people? Are they dead too?" "Some yes, some no. Some are here temporarily. Others will stay for much longer. It depends on each case." The man's words echoed in my mind. Dead? How could I be dead? Everything seemed so real, so vivid. I looked at my hands, which felt solid, yet with an ethereal quality that I couldn't explain. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking a little. "If I'm dead, why am I here? What should I do?" The man sighed as if he were dealing with a particularly stubborn child. "You are here because you have not yet accepted your situation. Most souls move on quickly, but some hold on to life so tightly that they are trapped in this place." He pointed to the distant light at the end of the tunnel. "That light? That's where you should go. It's the next step on your journey." I looked in the direction he was pointing, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. The light seemed to call to me, but something inside me resisted. "What if I don't want to go?" I asked. The man gave me a stern look. "It's not a matter of wanting, Miss Thorne. It's the natural course of things. Resisting will only make everything more difficult." At that moment, I felt a wave of panic wash over me. She wasn't ready to die, to leave everything behind. I thought about Elliot, about Marcus, about everything I still wanted to do in life. "There must be another option," I insisted. "Can't I just go back?" The man was silent for a moment, studying me with his piercing eyes. Finally, he said, "Coming back is not simple. It's not always possible. And even when it is, it comes at a price." "What price?" I asked, clinging to that small hope. Returning souls are never the same, he explained. They carry with them the weight of this place, the knowledge of things the living shouldn't know. Some go crazy. Others lose the will to live. It's a heavy burden. His words scared me, but they didn't weaken my resolve. I'm willing to take the risk, I said. I need to get back to my family. The man looked at me for a long moment as if assessing my soul. Then, to my surprise, he nodded slowly. Very well, he said. If this is what you really want, there is a way. But I warn you, it won't be easy. You will face challenges that will test the limits of your sanity and willpower. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decision I was about to make. But I knew I had no choice. I couldn't just give up. I'm ready, she said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The man waved his hand, and suddenly the tunnel around us began to change. The walls seemed to melt, transforming into a vortex of impossible colors and shapes. Remember. The man's voice sounded distant now, as if coming from far away. What you will see and experience next is not real in the sense that you understand reality. But it is also not an illusion. It is a journey through your own consciousness, into the deepest recesses of your soul. Face your fears, face your truths, and maybe you'll find your way back. And with those enigmatic words, the world around me exploded into light, and I felt myself falling toward the unknown. 7. The surreal encounter. As I struggled through the maze of my mind, facing memories and emotions, something unexpected happened. The scenery around me changed abruptly, and I found myself in a place I can only describe as, well, hell. It wasn't the hell of medieval paintings, with fire and demons. It was a dark, oppressive place with a heavy atmosphere that seemed to suck away all hope. And there, to my complete astonishment, was none other than Queen Elizabeth II. Yes, you heard right. The British monarch was there in what seemed like a version of hell. She was not sitting on a throne or wearing her crown. Instead, she looked tired, resigned. His eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a deep sadness that took me by surprise. Your Majesty? I stammered, barely believing my eyes. She looked at me with an expression that mixed recognition and regret. Ah, another lost soul, she said, her voice still maintaining that familiar regal tone, even in this surreal setting. Before I could say anything else, she started talking. What she told me in those moments left me astonished. Secrets she had kept throughout her long reign, truths that went beyond anything I could have imagined. Throughout my reign, she said, her voice low but clear, I knew of the presence of beings from other worlds on our planet. We had an agreement with them, a pact of silence. I was flabbergasted. Aliens? A secret deal? It seemed crazy, and yet the seriousness on his face, the resignation in his voice, made me believe every word. Why are you telling me this? I managed to ask. The Queen gave a sad smile. Because here, in this place, secrets no longer have power. And because you, my dear, are on a journey between worlds, perhaps you can do something with this information that I could not. I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted to better understand what she was telling me. But before I could, I felt a force pulling me away. The Queen's figure began to disappear into the darkness. Remember, I heard his voice echoing as I was ripped from that place. The truth is out there, and sometimes the weight of keeping it is what holds us back. In the blink of an eye, I was back in the maze of memories. My mind was spinning with what I had just experienced. Had it been real? A hallucination? Part of the dying process? I didn't know, and to this day, I'm not sure. What I do know is that surreal encounter with Queen Elizabeth in what seemed like hell left me with more questions than answers. It opened my eyes to possibilities I had never considered before, and it made me question everything I thought I knew about the world, about power, and about the secrets that some carry until after death. This experience, so bizarre and inexplicable, became an integral part of my near-death journey. A reminder that there are more mysteries in heaven and earth than are dreamed of by our vain philosophy, as Shakespeare once said, and a warning, perhaps, about the weight that secrets can have on our souls. In the years that followed, I often found myself thinking about that encounter, questioning its reality, its meaning. But one thing is certain: it has forever changed the way I see the world and the powers that govern it. And it left me with an unsettling certainty that there are truths beyond our understanding, waiting to be discovered. It was in this moment of deep despair that I heard my grandmother's voice again. "Vivienne," she called softly, "remember what I said. You need to accept, learn, and let go." His words centered me. I wiped my tears and forced myself to look at the images again. This time, instead of focusing on the pain of loss, I tried to see the love that permeated each scene. The pride in Marcus's eyes as he saw Elliot graduate, the strength of my family coming together in difficult times. Slowly, I began to understand. It wasn't just about me and my desire to return. It was about accepting that no matter what happened, life would go on. My family would find a way to move forward, carrying my love with them. With this understanding, I felt something shift within me. The pain didn't disappear completely, but it turned into something different, a serene acceptance, mixed with renewed determination. The walls of the maze began to dissolve around me. The darkness that surrounded me was slowly replaced by a soft, welcoming light. I felt like I was floating, as if I were being carried by a gentle current. And then I heard voices, distant at first but becoming clearer with each passing moment. I recognized Elliot's voice, desperate and pleading. "Mom, please come back to us. Don't leave us." Marcus's voice joined his. "Vivienne, my love, stay with us. Be strong." Their calls pulled me, guiding me back. I felt like I was rising from a deep dive, rising toward the surface, toward life. With one last effort, I opened my eyes. The first thing I felt was pain. A sharp, stabbing pain in my chest, as if every breath was a struggle. But this pain, as intense as it was a reminder that I was alive. My vision was blurry, but little by little the shapes began to define themselves. I was lying on the kitchen floor at my parents' house. Around me, a group of people were moving frantically. I recognized the paramedics' uniforms. I heard a deep voice say, "We have no pulse. Let's declare the time." It was at that moment that I found the strength to make a sound. It wasn't really a scream, but a hoarse, desperate moan that came from my throat. It was enough to make everyone around me freeze for a moment. "My God, she's alive!" exclaimed one of the paramedics. Suddenly, everything became a whirlwind of activity. I felt hands touching me, checking my vitals. Someone placed an oxygen mask on my face, and the cold air that entered my lungs was painful, but also incredibly revitalizing. "Vivienne! Vivienne!" I heard Elliot's voice, trembling and full of emotion. He appeared in my field of vision, his eyes red and swollen from crying. "Mom, you're here. You're back." I wanted to respond, to tell him that everything was okay, that I had fought back for him, for all of them. But my voice wouldn't come out. All I could do was lift my hand slightly, which Elliot immediately grabbed, holding it as if he was afraid I'd disappear if I let go. The paramedics worked quickly, preparing me for transport. I heard snippets of their technical conversations, something about my oxygen levels, need for immediate hospitalization, possible complications. But it all seemed distant, almost unreal compared to the intensity of my recent experience. As I was placed on the stretcher, I saw my parents in the corner of the kitchen, hugging each other and crying. My father, always so strong and composed, seemed to have aged years in a single night. My mother was sobbing openly, her shaking hands covering her mouth. That's when I noticed Marcus. He was standing near the door, his face a mask of shock and relief. Our eyes met, and I saw in him a love so deep, so unconditional, that it made me want to cry. He came closer, taking my other hand in his. "Vivienne, he whispered, his voice breaking. "I thought we lost you." I wanted to tell him that he would never lose me, that I would always find a way back to them. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I squeezed his hand as tight as I could, hoping he understood everything I wanted to say. As I was taken to the ambulance, my mind was still spinning with the images and sensations of my journey. The tunnel, the mysterious man, the maze of memories. It all felt so vivid, so real. Part of me wondered if it was just a dream, a hallucination caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain. But another part, a deeper part, knew that what I had experienced was something beyond normal understanding. In the ambulance, as the paramedics continued to monitor my vitals and administer oxygen, I allowed myself to relax a little. The sound of the siren and the sway of the vehicle were almost comforting, constant reminders that I was back in the world of the living. Elliot was sitting next to me, still holding my hand. He spoke softly, telling me about what the night had been like, how he'd woken up with a bad feeling and found me struggling to breathe. His words were punctuated by occasional sobs, and I could feel the fear he had felt, the relief he now felt. As I listened to him, I felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost hurt. Gratitude for being alive, for having the chance to see my son grow up, to grow old with my husband, to hug my parents again. But also gratitude for the journey I had experienced, for the lessons I had learned. I knew the following days would be difficult. There would be tests, treatments, endless questions from doctors and my family. I also knew that it would take time to fully process everything that had happened, to understand the meaning of my experience. But in that moment, lying on the ambulance stretcher, with my son's hand in mine, and the sound of sirens reminding me that I was alive, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. A deep certainty that no matter what the future held, I had the strength to face it. I closed my eyes, letting this feeling of peace wash over me. And for the first time in a long time, I breathed deeply, savoring each inhale as the precious gift it was. The days following my return were a whirlwind of medical exams, consultations, and intensive treatments. I was diagnosed with severe hypoxemia, lack of oxygen in the blood, caused by prolonged exposure to toxic mold in our home. The doctors were amazed at my survival, calling it miraculous more than once. I spent weeks in the hospital, hooked up to machines that monitored every aspect of my body. The constant sound of heart and respiratory monitors became a kind of background music to my new reality. Each day brought new challenges, painful breathing exercises, exhausting physical therapy sessions, an endless battery of exams. But amid all this medical chaos, there were moments of peace and reflection. In between treatments and visits, I found myself thinking about my experience. The memories of the tunnel, the maze, the visions I saw, remained vivid in my mind. It wasn't something I could just ignore or rationalize away as a dream. Initially, I was hesitant to share the details of my experience with anyone. I was afraid that they would think I was crazy, that they would attribute everything to hallucinations caused by a lack of oxygen. But as the days went by, I felt a growing need to talk about it. It was Marcus who first noticed that something was bothering me. One night, as he sat next to my bed, holding my hand as he did every night, he asked me softly, "Vivian, what's going on? You look different. It's not just the illness. There's something more, isn't there?" I looked at him, at the face I had known and loved for so many years, and suddenly the words began to flow. I told him everything: the tunnel, the mysterious man, the maze of memories, the visions of the future. I talked about fear, confusion, but also the peace and understanding I found. To my relief, Marcus didn't look at me like I was crazy. He listened intently, his hands holding mine tightly. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I don't know if I completely understand," he said finally, "but I believe in you, Vivian, and I'm so grateful that you found your way back to us." His words opened the floodgates. Over the next few days, I shared my experience with Elliot, with my parents, even with some of the doctors caring for me. Reactions varied. Some were skeptical, others fascinated, but everyone listened to me respectfully. One of the doctors, Dr. Patel, took particular interest in my story. He told me that he had been studying accounts of near-death experiences for years and believed they could offer valuable insights into human consciousness and the nature of life and death. "Your experience, Mrs. Thorne," he said to me one day, "is remarkably consistent with many other accounts I have studied. The sensation of leaving the body, the tunnel, the encounter with guiding beings, the review of life. All of these are common elements in NDEs. What makes your experience unique are the specific details, the lessons you learned." His words brought me a strange comfort. Knowing that I wasn't alone, that other people had gone through something similar, helped me accept and integrate my experience. As my physical health improved, I began to notice changes in myself that went beyond the physical. I had a new appreciation for life, a sense of purpose that I didn't have before. The little worries that used to consume me seemed insignificant now. Instead, I focused on what really mattered: my relationships, my health, the way I lived each day. I also noticed that I had developed a greater sensitivity to the emotions and needs of others. It was like I could feel the pain and joy of those around me in a way I had never experienced before. After almost 2 months, I was finally released from the hospital. Returning home was a bittersweet experience. Our house in Monterey, the place we once called home, had become uninhabitable due to mold. We had to temporarily move into a rented apartment while we decided what to do. The future was still uncertain. My health, although better, was still fragile. I would need continuous care, an oxygen machine at home, significant changes in our lifestyle. But despite all these challenges, I felt strangely at peace. Looking out the window of our new temporary apartment, watching the sun set over the Pacific, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for the second chance I had received, for the love of my family, for the opportunity to see life with new eyes. I knew the path ahead would not be easy, but I also knew I had the strength to face him. After all, I had been through the valley of death and back. Whatever life brought now, I was ready. 7 years have passed since that fateful night, and my life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. The recovery was long and sometimes painful. There were days when the simple act of breathing was a struggle, days when I wondered if I would ever feel normal again. But each day also brought small victories, moments of joy and gratitude that reminded me why I had fought so hard to come back. My health gradually improved, although it never completely returned to what it was before. I still use an oxygen machine on particularly difficult days, and I have to be extremely careful with my environment. But I've learned to see these limitations not as obstacles, but as reminders to value every breath, every moment. Our family life has undergone major changes. We decided not to return to our old home in Monterey. Instead, we moved to a small coastal town further north where the air is cleaner and the pace of life slower. Marcus was able to move his work to a home office, and I left my job as an accountant to focus on my health and a new passion I discovered: spiritual healing. Elliot, my brave son who saved me that night, is now in college studying psychology. He says my experience inspired him to want to better understand the human mind and help people deal with trauma and life-changing experiences. I couldn't be more proud of him. As for me, I've spent a lot of time over the last few years trying to understand and integrate my near-death experience. I read countless books on the subject, participated in support groups for people who have experienced NDEs, and even began meditating regularly, seeking to reconnect with that sense of peace I experienced during my journey. One of the biggest changes in my life was the way I started to see death. Before, I feared her, like most people. Now, although I still don't want it, I no longer see it as an end, but as a transition. That doesn't mean I no longer have fear or sadness when I think about leaving my loved ones one day, but there is a comfort in knowing that there is something beyond, something we can't fully understand with our limited minds. This new perspective has profoundly affected the way I live my life. I learned to prioritize what really matters: relationships, compassion, personal growth. The petty worries that used to consume me seem insignificant now. Instead, I try to live each day with purpose and gratitude. I also discovered a deep desire to help others. I began volunteering at a local hospice, offering support and comfort to people at the end of life and their families. It's emotionally difficult work at times, but incredibly rewarding. I feel like I can offer a unique perspective and understanding that comes not just from compassion, but from personal experience. I recently became a grandmother for the first time. Holding my newborn granddaughter in my arms was an overwhelming experience. Looking at her perfect little face, I felt a connection to the cycle of life in a way I had never felt before. Here was a new life, full of possibilities, and I was grateful to be alive to witness it. Many people ask me if I'm afraid of dying again. The truth is, no. I'm not eager to die. There's so much I still want to do and experience in this life. But when the time comes, I know I'll be ready. My experience has shown me that there is more to existence than we can see or touch, more than our current science can explain. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see the tunnel, the maze of memories, the light at the end. These images are no longer scary to me. Instead, they are reminders of where I've been, what I've learned, and how precious this life I have the privilege of living is. Sometimes I wonder about that mysterious man I met in the tunnel. Who was he? What did he represent? I never found definitive answers to these questions, but over time, I came to see that encounter as a symbol of the threshold between life and death, a keeper of the secrets we are not yet ready to fully understand. One of the most profound lessons I learned from my experience is the interconnectedness of all things. During my journey through the labyrinth of memories, I was able to see how every action, every choice we make, has repercussions that go far beyond what we can imagine. It made me much more aware of how I treat others, how I interact with the world around me. This awareness also extends to nature. After my experience, I developed a much deeper connection with the natural world. I began to see each tree, each animal, each drop of water as part of a greater whole, an intricate web of life of which we are all a part. This led me to become much more active in environmental causes, something that had never been a priority for me before. Another significant change was my relationship with time. Before, I was always rushing, always thinking about the next appointment, the next goal to be achieved. Now, I try to live more in the present. I learned to savor the simple moments, the taste of a cup of tea, the sound of my grandson's laughter, the feel of the sun on my face. These moments, I realized, are the true fabric of life. My experience also profoundly changed my spirituality. I've never been particularly religious, but now I have a deep faith in something bigger than ourselves. It is not a faith linked to any specific religion, but a belief in the fundamental goodness of the universe, in the continuity of consciousness beyond physical death. This faith brings me great comfort and gives me strength in difficult times. Of course, not everything has been easy. There are days when fatigue overtakes me, when frustration with my physical limitations leaves me feeling down. There are times when I find myself questioning my experience, wondering if it really happened or if it was just a trick of my oxygen-deprived mind. But then I remember the peace I felt, the clarity I experienced, and I know in my heart it was real. One of the hardest things has been trying to explain my experience to others. Some people are skeptical, some are curious, and some seem almost scared by what I have to say. I've learned to be selective about who I share my story with, not because I'm ashamed or afraid, but because I understand that not everyone is ready or willing to contemplate these deep questions about life and death. However, for those who are open to listening, I have found that my story can be a source of comfort and hope, especially for people who are facing terminal illnesses or who have lost loved ones. Being able to offer them a different perspective on death, one that is not based on fear but on acceptance and continuity, is something I consider a privilege and a responsibility. Looking back on that night when my life changed forever, I feel a mix of emotions. There is sadness for the suffering my family and I have endured. but also a deep gratitude for the journey I have been given. Every day since then has been a gift, an opportunity to live with more awareness, more compassion, more love. If there is one message I would like to share based on my experience, it is this. Life is precious. Every moment is an opportunity to grow, to love, to make a difference. We don't know how much time we have, so it's important that we live in a way that when our time comes, we can look back with no regrets. My near-death experience taught me that life doesn't end with the last heartbeat. There is more to our existence than we can see or touch. This understanding gives me peace and inspires me to live each day fully, with gratitude and purpose. I don't know what the future holds. My health is still unpredictable, and there are days when I feel fragile and vulnerable. But I also feel more alive than ever. Every breath is a reminder of the miracle of life. Every sunset a work of art. Every hug a treasure. So as I continue my journey, I take with me the lessons I learned from that incredible night. I carry the love of my family, the strength I discovered within myself, and the certainty that, no matter what happens, there is something beautiful and mysterious waiting for us beyond the veil of death. And so, with gratitude in my heart and hope for the future, I continue living, loving, and learning, one day at a time.